So I asked him to leave out one book that I've created. It's a children's book, because I wanted to tell you about it. It's a children's book that I did a Kickstarter campaign for about a week and a half ago, and it got funded in a day and a half, and it's called Everyone You Love Will Die. And I'm not joking. I really got this Kickstarter funded, and it's a great book I'm very proud of. So we're going to start off the day with a tough statistic, just like you'd expect from someone who's written some books with some pretty hard love titles, right? From 1400 to the early 1900s, millions of people died of a single disease. Now, while this is tragic, it's not altogether unprecedented in the history of humanity. But what does make it unprecedented is that all along this 500-year period, a cure for this illness, a simple, affordable, widely available cure for this illness was discovered again and again and again. Vasco da Gama and his men discovered a cure for this illness and found that by eating fresh produce, they could make it go away. Jacques Cartier and his men were cured of this illness by native Canadians who boiled for them a pine nettle tea. James Lind spent his whole life and wrote 3 books, treatises on the treatment of this, and no one read them. And I know some of the bloggers, including myself, know how that feels, right? 3 volumes, nobody read them. And it wasn't until 1932 when an American doctor named Charles Glenn King discovered vitamin C that we came to cure what? Scurvy. There we go. Scurvy. So why were we not able to cure scurvy? Why, as recently as World War I, was it impacting the fate of nations when all we had to do was eat some lemon juice? Right? Why is that? The answer lies here, because we were overcomplicating it. Every time a solution was proffered for the cure of scurvy, people scoffed at it because it was too easy. Okay, you're telling me my Navy's sunk, and the problem is we don't have enough lemons? Get out of here. Right? Because when we look for solutions to big problems, we're looking for complexity, we're looking for sort of a physical solution, and we want it to be external to us. You know, think about a pill. Think about a pill we can take. It's complicated, it exists outside of us, we take it and it cures a disease. But the fact is that so many of the biggest problems that beset the money management industry, the personal finance industry, and even just life in general are different. They're simple and they're behavioral. They're what I call River Jordan problems. So I hail from a center of financial acumen, culture, and sophistication known as the 4th largest city in Alabama, okay? And we do in Alabama what I'm about to do here, which is take you to church. We're about to get a little religion today. I want to share with you the biblical narrative of a man named Naaman, who was the PT money of his day. He was a big deal, dude. He was a big deal. And he was a pillar of his community. One thing, he had leprosy. This is where the similarities to PT drop off, right? He had leprosy. Shake his hand at the break. He's fine. I'm a doctor. He's fine. Okay. So Naaman has leprosy. And he, being a man of faith, goes to his sort of spiritual guru in the neighboring village, and he says, hey man, help me out, I got leprosy, I want you to cure me. And his spiritual leader sends back news with some servants, doesn't come in person, which greatly pisses off our protagonist here. He says, you didn't even deign to come and see me yourself, you sent your servants. And then what made it worse is that he gave him the following instructions. He said, here's how you're going to cure your leprosy, go bathe 7 times in the River Jordan. So at this time, Naaman freaks out because this swamp is the River Jordan, okay? Naaman says, I got better rivers left and right. There's better places that I can take a bath. Your cure is stupid, okay? At which point the servants say to him, Master, if we had asked you to do something hard, you would have done it. So just give it a shot. So legend has it, he bathes in the river and he's cured. We are beset by River Jordan problems. And one of the biggest River Jordan problems in our industry has to do with what I'll call behavioral economics, behavioral finance. So I want to share with you, going back to church, 10 commandments today, 10 principles that will help you manage your financial life and your investment life. The first principle is that in all markets, up, down, and sideways, you control what matters most. Over the past 20 years, in spite of two of the most brutal and gut-wrenching recessions and depressions that our country has ever seen, over the past 20 years, the stock market has returned 8.21% per annum on average. Okay, not bad. But what has the average investor gotten? The average investor in the stock market has only gotten a paltry 4.25%, and inflation over that time has been nearly 2.5%. So less than 2% of the money that the market's giving us actually translates into purchasing power. If you had just done nothing but buy index funds and leave them alone, you would have gotten about 6% a year. But yet, in our efforts to overcomplicate things and to try and be sophisticates and try and do too much, we end up mucking our lives up. And this is what we're going to talk about today. But the truth is, in all markets, you control what matters most. I get so upset when I hear people say, well, I couldn't help it. You know, everyone around me was getting rich, so I just had to buy all that Alibaba stock, right? I couldn't help it. Or, I couldn't help it. Everyone else was freaking out. We thought the world was going to end. I had to pull everything and put it in gun shelters and gold, right? I had to do this. No. In all markets, you control what matters most. And the finest example of this, I'm going to kind of blend the personal and professional throughout. I think the finest example of this is a gentleman named Dr. Viktor Frankl, who was an Austrian psychiatrist who wrote a book that you all should have read, and if you haven't yet, I would recommend it to you highly. It's called Man's Search for Meaning. Now, Dr. Frankl was incarcerated in the Nazi prison camps, and he found this great truth, that they could take away everything from him. They could do all manner of injustice and inhumanity and brutality toward him, but they could never take away his freedom. If they can't take away his freedom in the most inhumane and awful of human circumstances, you can maintain your freedom. Between stimulus and response, between what you watch on TV and that bad news you hear, and you hitting that trade button, there's a space for you to make better decisions. The second truth that we're going to talk about, the second commandment, has to do with risk. Now, I, for the last 7 years, have been working in the field of behavioral economics and behavioral finance. But before that, I was an honest-to-goodness shrink, like with a chaise lounge and like lay down and tell me about your mom kind of shrink. So my first client, I'm nervous as can be. I'm 23 years old, I'm in my doctoral program, and my first client comes to me. She opens the door. I've never seen a client in therapy before. She opens the door, and she's gorgeous. And I was somewhat as good with the ladies, I think, as probably Jeff was, our opening keynote. And so I dropped everything and started fumbling with everything and stuttering. But so we get down to the business of therapy now, and we start talking. And she presents to me 5 envelopes. And in these 5 envelopes are responses from 5 graduate schools to which she had applied for Masters of Public Health programs. And she says to me, Daniel, I cannot bring myself to open these, and they need a response by next week. I don't know if I got in or I didn't, but I cannot bring myself to open these, because if I didn't get in, the weight of that rejection is going to crush me, and I don't know what I'm going to do. So these 5 envelopes have been sitting on my desk for a month and a half as the deadline looms. So long story short, we worked through it. I helped talk her through it, and a couple of sessions in, with the deadline really getting close now, she opened these and got into all 5 schools. Fantastic, right? But in her efforts to manage risk, in her efforts to manage personal risk and disappointment, she nearly brought upon herself the most certain risk of all, that she wouldn't get to do what she had been dreaming of since she was a kid. Now, I went to the Broken Eggs film screening this morning, and it was fantastic. I would recommend you all talk to those folks. And they shared with us some sobering statistics that I think many of us are aware of. 46% of Americans have less than $10,000 saved for retirement. 60% of pre-retirees, so those in their mid-50s, have less than $25,000 saved for retirement, which is going to get you about to Wednesday of your retirement, right? This is a huge problem, and the thing is, we're thinking about risk in some wrong ways. I reject the notion of risk as volatility. In the field of investment management, they will tell you that the riskiness of an asset class has everything to do with its volatility. I say that risk has everything to do with you. Risk, as I envision it, is permanent loss of capital, but even beyond that, risk is an entirely idiosyncratic matter. Risk is all on you. Are you prone to greed and excitement and excessive speculation in the markets? Well, your risk might be being too throttled up. Are you prone to fear and not saving enough? Well, then you may not be risking enough. We need to understand risk not as volatility, but as the highly individualized concept that it is. I want to say this another way. Stand up, if you would, if you have started a small business. If you are a small business owner, please stand up. If you have started a blog in the last 18 months, please stand up. If you have joined social media in the last 18 months, please stand up. The rest of you sitting down, you should be ashamed. No. Which is the greater risk for you? All of you beautiful people standing up, you can have a seat now. What was the greater risk for you? To continue to toil and struggle and have your soul crushed by the man, right? Was that the greater risk? Or was the greater risk to take a little uncertainty, to take a little bit more volatility in your paycheck, to do what you really loved? I would suggest to you that risk is an entirely personal thing. And going back to the volatility thing for a minute, even if we want to talk about risk as volatility, I would say the average, I'd look to PT for this, but I would say the average age of a FinCon attendee is somewhere like mid-30s or so, right? Most of us are going to be net purchasers of equities, hopefully, for the next 20 or 30 years. If the stock market crashed 50% tomorrow, I would expect everyone in here to go pile every available dollar into it and pull out nothing. Because volatility can be our friend if we're operating in a diversified way and we have a long enough time horizon. The next principle that I want to talk about is that we need to start today and we need to start again tomorrow. Now, I'm preaching to the converted here because you understand the power of compounding money, the time value of money. We know that if we're trying to get $2 million in retirement, we know that starting at the age of 22, we're going to need to put aside a relatively meager $6,000 a year, assuming a pretty unspectacular market return. But if we wait till 40, it gets a lot heftier. $26,000 plus a year is tough to do on the average American salary. So there's value in that. But there's value beyond that as well. And it comes in the form of herding. So last night, we had that fantastic band walk us in and then walk us to our next event. It was, honest to goodness, the coolest thing I've ever been a part of in terms of sort of a speaker intro. Best ever. So as we're walking out, I start following the band. I start following the band out, having no clue where they're going. A woman behind me taps me on the shoulder and says, "Hey, where are we going?" And I said, "I have no idea." And she says, "So you're the kind of person who just gets in a line and follows people to an unknown destination?" And I said, "Yeah, I guess so. And I guess so are you," right? So we all engage in this herding. We all know about peer pressure. You've probably done all kinds of crazy, unspeakable things as a result of it, right? We all know about peer pressure. But did you know that there is such thing as internal peer pressure? I want to share with you a psychological experiment called the free choice paradigm that I think is super cool. The free choice paradigm goes something like this. I bring Athena into my office, and I say to her, "Athena, I've got 6 impressionist pieces of artwork here, and I want you to rank them from number 1 to number 6, and I want you to choose your favorite, and you get to take it home." So she ranks them from number 1 to number 6, and I go, "Excuse me, I'm going to run back to my office, get number 1 for you, and you're on your way." But being the sneaky shrink that I am, and all psychologists are tricky and devious. You should know this. I come back with my Mr. Burns fingers, and I say to her, we're out of number 1 and number 2. We're out of number 5 and number 6. You can have number 3 or you can have number 4. Which would you like? She says, well, I'll take number 3. They were both kind of middling preferences anyway, but I'll take number 3, right? So she takes number 3, and I call her back 2 weeks later. I say, hey, Athena, it's Dr. Crosby again. Could you come back? I just want to put you through that experiment one more time. What has happened to her preferences in the interim, in that intervening 14 days? Number 3, the one that she took home, is now typically her favorite painting of the 6. Number 4, the one that she did not take home, is now typically her least favorite painting. What has been her internal dialogue over this 2 weeks? The internal dialogue has been, I got the one I wanted, I have awesome taste, this was a great choice, I'm smart, I have excellent taste, I'm a person of culture and sophistication, and the other one sucked anyway, and I'm so glad I didn't get it, right? There's 2 things happening simultaneously. She's building up the choices that she made, and she's tearing down the choices that she didn't make. When we make a decision early in our lives to save, to educate ourselves about investment, to do all of the things that come so naturally to this community, we make choices. And as we go through life, we make judgments about those choices, and being these self-aggrandizing, pat ourselves on the back type of folks that we are, we make positive judgments about the things we've decided to do, and these become embedded into our heads and into our hearts and into our behaviors, and they impact future choices. You can absolutely peer pressure yourself into doing something.
Control Lisa Bailey.
Can we turn the volume up a bit?
To North Portland tonight. Lisa, you
Can we hit the volume up a bit? I want to.
were showing us that snow piling up there in North Portland on North Mississippi. It's just hard to believe.
It is incredible. In fact, I just asked, and Bruce just said they've got about 3 inches here in North Portland right now. I caught up with Chelsea and Michael, who were jogging by, and were nice to just stop for a quick second. And I said, what are you doing running? And you're saying it was really good out?
It's the perfect texture for running. Very low impact on its dry snow, so your feet don't get wet.
What have you seen while you've been out running?
It's been a lot of fun. There's a lot of other runners and more skiers than runners for sure. I think they've got a little bit of the advantage with the whole stride and glide thing, but it's too nice to not be out here.
Yeah, it's incredible, though, just to see even people still on their bicycles.
Yeah. I don't know how they do it with the bikes, like braking. At least we can control, you know, at worst case, we can just slide right through a stop sign and we'll be okay because we're pretty visible at night.
Did this surprise you, this snow?
This much of it, I think. When we woke up this morning, we were definitely surprised by how much there was. We were sort of joking that it was a nice dusting, but the reality is this is a real chunk of snow, giving Hood a run for its money.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, we're both California kids, so we haven't had many snow days in our life, so this is pretty exciting.
All right, well, go ahead and keep on the run. I'm sorry to have kept you, but I appreciate you guys talking with us.
Stay warm.
All right, thanks. We've seen a lot of people out here, like you said, running, sledding, just enjoying it. One thing, oops. That can happen, unfortunately. Looks like Chelsea's okay.
That can happen.
You okay? Yes, okay.
All right. Okay. Now is the gut check time, FinCon. Be honest with me, people. Let's get dirty. Who was happy to see that happen a little bit? Who was a little bit, it's the perfect powder. Yeah. Slide and glide. Yeah. That was awesome. I mean, the first. So my wife came in on me watching that clip just like on repeat. And she was like, you are a sick dude. You are not right. So I want you to forever remember these bougie, obnoxious Portlanders or wherever they were from, whatever hippie enclave they emerged from. And I want you to remember them the next time the market crashes. And I want you to remember that deep, delicious sense of schadenfreude you felt when you saw her crack her head on the sidewalk. Oh, stop. You loved it. Stop it. So I want to feature now. We all know this, though. We all know what Sir John Templeton's saying here. We all know what Warren Buffett said, to be greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy. We know that trouble is opportunity, and yet we don't act like it. But yet these are the biggest advantages that we have, really. So my research, when I'm not out speaking, my research is around market sentiment. So what is the psychology of the broader market? What is sort of the level of fear or greed? And I've come up with a really nerdy system for classifying this called the Irrationality Index. And it goes from 0 to 100, 0 being extreme fear and 100 being extreme greed. I have about 26 years of data on this Irrationality Index that I back-tested for that period of time. And a couple of years ago, it hit its lowest point of all time. It got to a level of 5 out of 100, which signals what I call a period of market revulsion. And it stayed in this revolting category for 5 months in a row. This is a time where equity inflows were massively in the negative. Everyone was freaking out. And if you would put $10,000 in when it hit that 5, you'd have $30,000 just a couple years later. Trouble is always opportunity. Trouble is always opportunity. I want you to stand up now, because the average, everybody stand up, everyone. The average human attention span is like 12 minutes. You're well past your attention span. Stand up. All right, so let's get friendly, FinCon. We're in the World Cup now. We're in the World Cup. I am coming at you, and I'm dribbling the ball. Let's pretend I know a damn thing about soccer for a minute, okay? So I'm dribbling the ball. I'm coming at you, and it's just me and you. You are the goalie. I'm going to kick it at you, and you've got 3 options. You can dive right. You can dive left. This is your right, your left. You can dive right, you can dive left, or you can stay in the center. On the count of 3, I'm going to ask you to physically do your choice, okay? Keeping in mind Josh's admonition this morning, guys, that you should not be a creeper, okay? Don't be a creeper when you're diving. So 1, 2, 3, go. Pathetic, I scored on you. No, okay. So you can have a seat now. Thank you very much. So raise your hand if you dove left or right. If you made a dive left or right. Now raise your hand if you stayed in the center. Okay? Right. A couple of you read behavioral economics textbooks, right? So we have an action bias, which is when things are hitting the fan, we just don't want to stand there. We want to do something. And the same is true of goalies. And they find that in these premier leagues, the goalies dive right or left 94% of the time. But that the very best thing a goalie could do is stand there like a dummy right in the middle of the goal. Now you can tell a goalie this, and they're still going to make a dramatic leap to the right or left. Why? Because if they're going down, by golly, they're going down swinging, and they want to look like they tried as hard as they can, even though they stopped the most goals in the lazy condition. The next commandment of behavioral finance is that you should do less than you think you should. The reason that investing is so hard is because it flies in the face of everything we know to be logical and rational in other areas of our life. Okay? Imagine if I said to you, you know what you should do to lose 20 pounds? Nothing. Sit there. Sit there, right? We would never think that that's the case. But in investing, you need to do less than you think you should. And why is that? Nobel Prize winner William Sharpe found that you need to hit the market right, you need to time the market right 82% of the time to match, buy, and hold. To give you a sense of who you're up against, Warren Buffett aims to get it right about 2/3 of the time. He sees that as a success if he makes a good decision 2/3 of the time. But you, brilliant as you are going to try and get it right 82% of the time to match doing nothing. Another thing found by Dr. Sharpe is that 80% of market returns happen over just about 2% of the time. It's not timing the market, it's time in the market. And study after study shows that we need to take the advice of Winnie the Pooh and never underestimate the power of just doing nothing. Sound advice. The next commandment is that forecasting is for weathermen. I talked to a couple of people earlier who worked for J.P. Morgan, and I loved meeting people who work for J.P. Morgan because J.P. Morgan, the man himself, is like one of the original badasses in the world of finance. They were pestering him one day for a market outlook, pestering him, the press, bugging him and bugging him. Mr. Morgan, what's it going to do? What's it going to do? So J.P. Morgan calls a press conference. They ask him, what's it going to do? And he says, it will fluctuate. And in my mind, he just drops the mic and he just walks away, right? In my mind, he drops that mic. It will fluctuate. That's all you can say for sure. Forecasting is for weathermen. Ben Graham, who was Warren Buffett's mentor, said it's not an appropriate part of security analysis. And then we're all familiar probably with the famous best-selling investment book, Dow 36,000. We're only a little more than halfway there 15 years later. He thought that 36,000 was right around the corner. Okay? So a little more research on experts. Philip Tetlock of UCLA did a study on experts and found the following. The more famous the expert, the less likely they were to be correct. Okay? Jim Cramer, his picks, right? His picks were off 10% from 05 to 07. During the Great Recession, his picks underperformed by 5%. He famously advocated buying Bear Stearns the day before it collapsed. And yet, he has 100,000 plus viewers a night, and we don't. The more famous an expert is, the more likely, the less likely they are to be correct. Okay? The second finding by Tetlock was that the bolder the prediction, the less likely they were to be correct. So often on financial media, you'll see someone on TV and they'll go, we'd like to welcome Dr. So-and-so who totally called 2008. Dr. So-and-so, please give us your next bold prediction. You know why Dr. So-and-so called 2008? Because he called it in 2002 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, and he ran into one. He ran into one, and then he got famous, and now people are going to look to him until he looks dumb again, which won't take long. Okay? And then finally, learning that they were wrong all the time did nothing to diminish the confidence of these experts. They confront them with these facts and say, hey, look, you kind of suck at predicting. Maybe you should stop. And they go, nah, I'm good. The market's not behaving as it should. It'll come around, right? Didn't help. Didn't help. So our financial analysts, our stock prognosticators, the smartest guys and gals in the room, David Dreaman, the value investor and famous contrarian, studied almost 80,000 data points and found that one time in 170 are analysts within 5% of the appropriate return prediction. 1 in 170 are they within the broadside of a barn of getting it right. When we had our first child, we went to our doctor in Atlanta, and my wife was approaching term, and we said to the doctor, how big is the baby? How much does the baby weigh? And they said to us, 7 pounds plus or minus 3 pounds. I kid you not. So I said to the nurse, so my baby is a crack baby or a giant. Even that is a better prediction than this, right? So why do we continue to listen to experts? We listen to experts because it helps calm our brains. Our brains use 20% of the caloric intake of our body. 20% of the calories you take in are used by your brain. Maybe it's time for some of us to start thinking a little harder, right? Expert advice, listening to financial experts actually attenuates activity. It actually shuts down activity in the part of the brain that loads onto critical thinking. So we can offload this tough process of thinking by this energy-hungry piece of our body by just going, Kramer, just tell me what to do. Kramer, just tell me what to do. So we continue to gobble up expert advice even in the face of it being a bad idea. This is where this community comes in. This is where the people that I have met at this conference who have great hearts and great minds come in to provide the world with sound financial advice that helps them get the help that they really, really need. So I want you to do this now. I want you to, if you have a pen and paper or whatever, iPad, whatever, I want you, now caveat, do not raise your hand, do not shout out a cute remark right now because we're doing a psychological experiment. I want you to spell the word die. Go. All right. Raise your hand if you spelled it dye like D-Y-E, like you dye your hair. Okay. Very good. Raise your hand if you spelled it die like die death, right? Okay. Keep them up. Death, people. Keep them up. Would you please go hug the death people? Would the hair dye people go hug the death people? Please, please. This is what we call affect heuristic, which shows that the mood that you're in has everything to do with the way that you think and the way that you interpret information. Now, I'm taking it a tad bit personally that most of you are thinking about death while I'm up here speaking, but I'm going to let it go. Which brings us to the next commandment, that if you're excited about an investment, then it's probably a bad idea. If you're excited about an investment, it's probably a bad idea because excitement is not the affect under which you make your best decisions. My brother-in-law works in technology, and he emailed me today and said, should I buy Alibaba? And I said to him, you dummy, have I taught you nothing, right? IPOs on average do 21% worse than the benchmark 3 years on. There's this initial burst of excitement, and then it kind of dies off. Now, there are notable exceptions to this, of course. There are notable exceptions to this, and these loom large in people's mind. Well, what if I had bought this, or what if I had bought that? Right? There are far many more losers than winners in the IPO game, especially when the market gets hot and you get a lot of IPOs, right? IPOs in general are a bad idea. Paul DePodesta, who used to work with the Dodgers, tells a story of going down to Vegas. And a friend of his hitting on 20. They're playing blackjack, and his friend has 20, and he asked the dealer for another card. And DePodesta says, you are an idiot, man. You were an idiot. Why would you ever hit with 20? And he gets an ace, and he gets 21, and he wins his hand. And his friend turns to him and says, ha, who's the idiot now? You're still an idiot, right? If you get the right outcome for the wrong reason, you're still an idiot, okay? IPOs in general are a bad idea. Maybe you got lucky on one. You're still dumb, right? The second thing is that neuronal patterns of day traders are akin to people who have done drugs. Nancy Reagan told you to just say no to crack. Daniel Crosby is telling you just say no to exciting investing. Because only 1 in 360 day traders in a seminal study that just came out showed any evidence of alpha, any evidence of investment sophistication and real skill. It's just hard to do when you're trying to do it fast and furious like this. We learned as therapists to try and keep people from making decisions when they were in one of the following states, and the little acronym was HALT. If you're hungry, you're angry, you're lonely, you're tired, you should not be making important decisions about your life or your money. The next commandment is, this time isn't different, and frankly, neither are you. Okay, so let's talk about this. In one of my favorite books, A Short History of Financial Euphoria, talks about these as the 3 conditions for market bubbles. These are sort of the 3 conditions for market bubbles. We have a brief memory. We forget how bad things were. We conflate wealth and intelligence. Well, my broker has a $10,000 watch, so he must know what the hell he's doing, right? And then we believe, most importantly, that there's something new in the world. During the Tulip Mania, the Dutch at times traded a single tulip bulb for the price of an entire house or a 1 year's salary in some cases, right? In 2000, we saw Toys.com have a greater market capitalization by a factor of 8. Despite having negative profitability, they had 8 times the market cap of Toys R Us, which was a billion-dollar company, a multi-billion-dollar company. Why is that? Because the internet was going to change everything. Just because something is a big deal doesn't mean it's going to be a big deal investment. And you are not different either. Some of you inevitably are hearing this and going, yeah, I understand this applies to the unwashed investment masses, but I'm special. I'm different, right? And this illusion of uniqueness can kill you. When I wrote my book, You're Not That Great, one of the people whose work I studied very intensely was a woman named Carol Dweck, Dr. Carol Dweck. She works in the trenches of the New York City school system, and Dr. Dweck did this fascinating study. There were 2 conditions. There's 2 groups. One is praised for being special. You are such a brilliant, unique little snowflake, Johnny. Thank you for being in my class, okay? The second group was praised for being hardworking. Thank you for working so hard, Johnny. You really gave it your best. They were then asked to transcribe their grades and send them to a pen pal, to transcribe their report card and send it to a pen pal who they would ostensibly never meet. The people who had been praised for being special lied 40% of the time on their report card. The people who had been praised for just working hard showed no evidence of cheating. When people think they are special or different, they will engage in all manner of unethical behavior and stupidity to keep that crown of specialness. Do what works. Don't think you're different. Do what has worked over 100 years of investment discipline. Now, I want you, don't get me wrong, I don't want to be a downer here. I want you to be optimistic, and this is an optimistic crowd because small business owners are optimists. There is no reason any of our businesses should have worked out, right? I mean, on the whole, starting a small business is a losing proposition. By and large, it is a bad idea from a probability standpoint. And yet the people in this room derive so much joy and do so much good because they were optimists. I should put a picture of my wife right here. Because if I put a picture of my wife right here, you would go, dude, that was really optimistic of you to go talk to her. That was, you took a leap there, guy, right? Be optimistic. Just don't be optimistic here in the market. The next to last commandment that I want to talk about is that you should be the benchmark. There's so much talk in the financial media about performance relative to a benchmark. But we need to be benchmarking to our own lives. Nobody is going to write on your tombstone, he beat the S&P 12 out of 15 years, right? But they might write on your tombstone, he ate cat food because he didn't plan successfully. We need to be our own benchmark. We need to be our own benchmark. What had positive equity flows? What type of account had positive equity flows from 07 to 11? There were 2 types. 529s and IRAs. And the distinguishing characteristic, when everyone else was pulling out equities out of everywhere, some of the distinguishing characteristics of the 2 types of accounts that continued to do well is they were tied to deeply held, meaningful goals that are easily imagined and easily looked forward to. And this is an incredibly powerful thing. This is where I throw up a picture of my kids, and you go, "Aw, thank you." These are my kids. This is Charlotte and Liam. And I put this picture of them up here to tell you about a study done by a large financial institution that wanted to help low-income folks save more of their money. They found that when they had bank account 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they were not saving enough of their money. So they began to label their accounts just with text with things that meant something to them. So instead of account number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it might say the Charlotte and Liam Fund. When we call it the Charlotte and Liam Fund in this experiment, savings increased dramatically. But then they took it one step further, and they put a picture of Charlotte and Liam by that bank account. Savings doubled. All too often, we have disconnected our financial behaviors from the things that we love the most. And when we can recouple those things and join them back together, powerful and positive things happen. SEI, a third-party investment manager based in Philly, had a great new goals-based investing platform in place in 2008 when it all went wrong. People who were not explicitly tying their goals to their investments, 60% of them liquidated entirely or took most of their money out. Those who had tied them to goals, 75% of them made no changes, and most of the changes that were made were small. Are you and your clients doing enough to wed what matters most to you and what you're doing with your money? I'm about to wrap up here and turn it back to you, but I want to close up with this quote, or one more slide after this. Sir Isaac Newton, we would all say, is a brilliant person, but yet he lost his shirt. He lost all his money in a financial crisis, in a financial bubble, the South Sea bubble. And when questioned about this, how could a man as brilliant as you lose all his money like this? He said the following. He said, I can calculate the movement of the stars, but not the madness of men. It's not about being smart. Luckily for all of us, right? It's not about being smart. It's about being disciplined. So with my final slide, I want us to take on the challenge that PT gave us this morning. I don't remember the exact phraseology of the slide, but he said something to the effect of FinCon exists to do good in the world for people who need help with their finances, right? This is what we're about. We're about giving back. We're about putting that into the world. So if you've been counting, I've only done 9. I would like for you to take a second now, as we close, to get out your iPad, to get out your iPhone, to write rule number 10. And write rule number 10 and to share that rule with the world. Because this group is going to reach millions of people over the next few days. We have the power, when others have perverse incentives and paychecks that make them do crazy things, we in this room have the power to impact the financial lives and the financial stability of the people that need it most. And that is a power that we should honor and treat with a great deal of respect. Thank you so much for having me out. It has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.